May begin.
Project your voice.
We're a little early. You want to start early? You got everything? Yes, we do. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
It's weird having you all here. Do we have anybody online?
Gretchen, I think is on. Yeah, or no, now before we start, I just want to introduce everyone to two people. First, Taylor Frome. This is she's the interim executive director of FAR, Public Housing Association of Residents, here in place of Shelby, and we're going to work with her to potentially have her be the next voting member of the partnership. Shelby, I believe, has moved on from FAR.
Yeah, she's relocated to Chicago.
Yes, so, but I know that Taylor was saying she was in the process of hiring a full-time executive director or permanent executive director, but for now, we're happy to have you here.
I'm probably here through February.
Perfect. That'll get you up. And then, Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm the new regional housing grants manager. So I'll be managing home art, and HPG grants. So,
What's your name?
that's right, Lori Jean Touloon. Yeah.
Yeah, if we, yeah,
That would help me.
that'd be great. Do you want to go around the room and introduce yourselves?
I'm Anthony Harlow, I'm the director of the Blue Ridge Way to project people. I'm Anthony Harlow, executive director for Blue Ridge Area Coalition for the Homeless.
I'm Ed Galloway. I'm on the American Board of Supervisors.
Hi, my name's Keith Smith. I guess I'm here, what kind of wearing? Yeah, that's the hat I'm wearing. Vice Chair, thank you.
Hi, I'm Colette Shady. I'm the Senior Vice President for Operations and State Government Relations at UVA.
I'm Margaret Claire. I'm the executive director of the Nelson County Community Development Foundation. I am the appointed rural nonprofit.
I'm Greg Powell. I'm an architect here in town. We do a lot of affordable housing through my firm. I'm here as private sector.
Extraordinary.
And I'm Ian Baxter. I work here at the TAPC.
Christine Jacobs, the executive director. I just got three members.
Awesome. Well, that brings us right till 2, so I will call the Regional Housing Partnership Executive Committee to order. And do we have anyone here from the public to speak to us today? Nobody online, so we'll close matters for the day. And on our consent agenda, we have the draft minutes and the monthly financial update. Ian, any items on the financial update that you want to?
No, nothing. I mean, Christine, you want to, you're more familiar with it. I feel like we're just on, this is a much bigger budget than the last fiscal year, so I think we're on pace to, we're spending it at a reasonable rate.
I don't really think that profit and loss is in there, and we're good on that.
We, in review of the minutes, were there any changes or modifications needed?
Yes. There, in the last paragraph of the last page, is a blank that needs to be filled in. It said, Keith Smith said he recently wrapped up an effort with blank in Seattle. Was that with Robert Liberty, or was that with like the university out there, Keith?
I apologize.
In Seattle, it says, Keith Smith said he recently wrapped up an effort with blank in Seattle.
Yeah, so that was, I did that on my own, but that was working with the city of Portland, the city of Seattle.
We'll just add that to minutes.
Great. Any other changes or modifications? So is there a motion to
Move to approve.
Second.
As amended, Mr. President?
As amended.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Consent agenda is passed. So before we go to the bylaws review, I'm going to have a confession to this. I've been double booked today. So I suspect, as preface, that the hour and so time to bylaws is not going to be needed. So we're going to be moving through this a lot faster. But I will have to exit at some point to go to that meeting late. My audit committee in the county is meeting, so they know I'm arriving late, so I'll be leaving early, arriving late to that. And Keith, we're glad to see you here.
Oh, great, thanks.
Yay. But I also think we're going to be able to move through things quickly. The next item, today's main reason for getting together was to do the bylaws review, which was sent out in advance. And the idea is this is part of our strategic plan, the work that this committee is going to do in addition to the two committees that we stood up for data and communications. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to review the bylaws. And today we would have to make any recommendations in terms of changes that then we would take to the full partnership, hopefully at our December meeting, to vote on any of those modifications. As a way of just starting the conversation, there were two areas that I identified that I think need to be, or would make suggestions for modifications, and then obviously if any others need to be made or you want to make them, then now's the time to discuss it. The first, I think, is an easy one. We had, and I remember working this out originally, the electronic meeting participation was one that we defined pre-pandemic. The TJPDC has since passed their own electronic meeting participation policy. So we need to just get our bylaws in line with the TJPDC. So I don't think we even need to, happy to review it. We'll put the new, I think, Ian, we should just refer to the TJPDC's policy and then attach it as an addendum to our bylaws. Essentially what that means is that it's following what most of the local governments are, that you can only meet electronically for full meetings no more than 2 times, or basically 2 times based on our meeting count, or 25% of the time, and you can't have more than 2 meetings, you can't have 2 meetings in succession. So October and November.
Electronic.
Fully electronic.
Fully electronic.
So we could, provided, or we would be allowed to have 2 full electronic meetings as a partnership and/or executive committee, if we so choose to do. So that's what would be allowed. So I would guess in January, we would want, if we want to do that, we should identify where they are as best practice, I think, to say, here's when we would do it. But it wouldn't preclude us from, let's say we want to do a full partnership in December, we get hit with a blizzard. As long as we can provide notice well enough in advance to meet the notice guidelines, we could hold that or change something to virtual if needed. We just, like I said, have to adhere to the notice guidelines. But that's what that policy says in a nutshell.
If you're not having a full virtual meeting, can people participate virtually? Is there any limit to the times that you can participate virtually? I thought so, just
You mean for the members or for the public?
No, for the members. And does there need to be a physical forum here? Okay.
Yes, if the meeting is held in person and advertised as in person, there needs to be a quorum present in person.
Mm-hmm.
People can participate electronically per the policy, which is straight out of the code.
Right.
That's also the 2 times or 25%, whichever is greater. And then there are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to participate electronically. Personal matter, medical exemption, and there's a list of those that you would tell the chair, I want to participate electronically for this reason, and then that has to be stated in the minutes.
Okay.
And it has to be voted on and approved
Right.
by the in-person quorum to allow electronic participation.
That's what I thought.
And that part's in here, right, under,
What's in there in your draft is the
Pre-pandemic.
previous, what we set up as our electronic participation, which was frankly boilerplate of what boards were using pre-pandemic.
okay.
So part of this bylaws cleanup is let's just get in line with what the TJPDC Commission has voted on as their, because it's appropriate that all committees under the commission just follow the
And you were just describing the guidelines for TJPDC.
Yes, if that were to be what we put into these bylaws, where it would just reference the TJPDC's policy as approved by the commission, that would be an addendum onto the bylaws that are provided to all members, so they know the electronic policy.
So how this would work for review, prior to our full partnership meeting, the new suggested bylaws will come out that we agree on today for full vote. So you'll have a chance to review that policy and see how it brings up language-wise. So today is just advancing forward our recommendations to the full partnership.
since we are an actual body of the commission, it's almost just a given. It has to match that. So I think this is a simple topic to tackle. And we can head on to the next one.
Yep, the next one I highlighted it, well, maybe I did, if it was our agenda setting meeting or not. We set up, I think with good reason, the term limit of the officer from the get-go to be 1 year. So, and I'm fine with, we can keep the language as 1 year, or if we want to change it to 2 years for the officer, what have you. We extended and put in the bylaws for pandemic reasons, the ability to have Keith serve as chair an additional year, because we had restricted it to no more than 2 terms. I would simply suggest we add in the language that gives the executive committee the flexibility. I mean, whether we keep the 2-year term, I feel like if it's a 1-year term, locking it into 2 years can be restrictive in some ways, and we saw a good reason why coming out of the pandemic. I would almost want to move the terms to 2 years, but I think it's easier for the executive committee to retain control if we just put some language in at the end of the term limit that suggests, unless the executive committee votes by majority, et cetera, that the officer may continue for an additional term. Then it just leaves it to the circumstance in the body to make the decision at that time. Versus locking in a two-year terms can become problematic too. Like somebody might not want to serve for 2 years and they just want to commit for a year.
So there's 2 issues. One is the executive committee members, and then the second is the leadership of the executive committee. There's 2 separate discussions.
The members of the executive committee, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a few days since I've read all these, are not term limited, right? Just the officers.
That's right.
So
that
the
is
officers,
the current situation.
Yeah. So the officers, we voted Keith to be chair for the 3rd year, and we put in the addendum about keeping the continuity with the pandemic. And then this year, I took over, we kind of swapped positions. But what I'm saying is that I think we need to give the executive committee the flexibility that basically saying that the desire is to have 1-year terms, not serving for 10 years is what we were concerned about. You don't want somebody locked in for huge amounts of time. But if the executive committee would like the chair to continue, we build in the language that says the executive committee can add a 3rd year or a 4th year to a term if they choose to do it without being in violation or coming up with creative uses of bylaws at that time. To just say, okay, yeah, if the circumstances are relevant and the executive committee deems are worthwhile, then we can vote to have a person be vice chair or chair for an additional year. It doesn't have to end in 2 years. So I'm throwing that out for discussion and thoughts.
Can somebody show me where the executive
It's
and
right
the
there,
executive
6.
committee is?
The executive committee,
Article, you mean who's on the executive committee?
No.
Article 4.
The limits of the lead, where's the leadership of
So
the
if you
executive?
go to Article 5, which is officers, I believe, number 6 is election and term of office.
And number 5 right now has the existing terms, the 1 year.
and what
So
is,
everything you just said about we agreed for 2 years and extended to 2, there's nothing said here about.
There's an addendum to that.
Thank you.
So the members of the committee get voted in on an annual basis. The officers get voted on an annual basis. The piece I'm honing in on is the term limit of the officers to give the executive committee the ability to allow officers to serve more than 2 years if they deem it necessary. So that's the change that I would be saying under the term of office, where it says officers may not serve more than 2 consecutive years in one officer position. Like, maybe strike that to soften it up where it's not, may not, where it's desired that an officer serve no more than 2 years, but may do so with the proper vote of the executive, something of that nature. Unless people just want to lock it in and you hold to 2 years, no more than 2 terms.
Let me ask a question, because I heard you say there may be hesitation for someone to take longer than a year. With a body that only meets quarterly, turning over that chair on an annual basis seems like there's not enough time to get into it. It seems to me like a 2-year term is 8 meetings and then you could have up to 2 terms, which is 4 years. And that would have a lot of flexibility for someone to stay in a leadership role. And then you could still put in language that said, and get a 3rd term under special circumstances at a vote of the board. But to me, the 1 year feels like it would be a lot of turnover, and we'd be spending a meeting every year redoing our officers and redoing, you know.
I mean, that's where I was initially, and I thought, well, if we do 2 years, you could still effectively do it, so, yeah, I'm fine with that too.
Well, someone can resign and there should be a mechanism to replace that
Correct,
person.
which is actually covered.
Right. So,
Yeah, I would support the 2-year term, because I totally agree with you that that's, you hardly get going, and you figure out of office technically.
I wouldn't.
And a person coming in should be able to know that they have 2 years to work through an agenda and, you know, plan and that kind of thing.
So is that true of the whole executive committee and its officers? Are we talking about both?
It would just be the officers.
What about the executive committee?
The executive committee, it's an annual appointment, but there's just no term limit as to when.
I think we need to have that discussion also.
Because I don't
That's
think we've
my
ever
third
had.
time trying to throw it out here.
Yeah, I think separate from the terms of the officers, we should also talk about the membership of the executive committee and the terms of the executive committee.
Yes, well, let's finish Ned's
let's do
thing and then let's go to.
Sounds like we finished it. We've
Yeah.
got 2-year terms for chair, vice chair, and language for,
Extension.
opening up the extension by way of the executive committee.
What if we even said 2-year term, up to 2 terms, that's 4 years, and then language to extend if needed? You know, like, then you don't have to vote if somebody wants to be chair for 2 more years, that's already allowable.
Yeah, because you vote on the chair involved anyway. I mean, I'm fine here, I'm good with it.
What did we settle on?
2-year terms, up to 2
2
terms.
consecutive terms.
2 consecutive terms, and then putting in language that would allow a 3rd term if the executive committee deemed it necessary. Those are the only 2 elements that I flagged. So the 3rd item in the hearing is, do we want the term limit?
Well, let me just ask, because I don't interact much with the regular board members above this group. Have we become this elite group that everybody resents? Have we become this group that, okay, let them deal with it? Is everybody fine that there's not been any turnover on this group?
I think the design of this group was your second statement. Yeah, let them deal with it. Especially at the beginning.
Well, that's been a little bit my sense, but I wonder if I'm out of touch.
I haven't gotten feedback that is negative that the executive committee has stayed the way that it is, especially because it was a startup partnership, like it needed some stability, same people doing. I think best practice and healthy governance would say there should be some level of transition on an executive committee.
Yeah, I agree. And as a reminder, the piece that is going to be done by the consultant,
Well, we have to just,
we'll discuss that.
yeah,
But the idea that we briefly chatted about at the last meeting is that as part of the strategic plan, we would do the bylaw revision. We, the executive committee, would be the committee that handles that. Is the membership of the full partnership and the membership that is represented on the executive committee, that analysis or the work that's done on that, by what we were thinking is that we would have the consultant within our strategic plan help us with that work. To determine, do you have, not necessarily like, is Greg the right person or Colette? Do we have the right people represented on the executive committee or areas of influence, I guess, stakeholders? And then I presume they're gonna give thought to mix and move, and should there be term limits, or what's the time frame? So that'll be part of the conversation.
Well, it should be, so let's not assume that, let's ask that.
that is part of the scope of work, at least what we drafted, yeah. But
I mean, candidly, I've been sitting here since day one on the executive committee. I'm not totally comfortable with that. I feel I should step off this year, and somebody else, we should start seeing some new blood in here. I'm just letting everybody know. We should think about the timing of that. I think it has to do with what's going on there, has to do with the new fiscal year. Not because I don't think this group is doing good things, far from it. But I feel that it would be healthy to get some churn at this level. And also, I think at the broader board level.
And, oh, go ahead, sorry.
You go first.
Well, I was gonna say, I agree. I think it makes sense for us up to now, for us to have gotten this work done with continuity of people, and I think, like you're saying, best practices moving forward, we should try to build that in. And I guess it's just like a little bit like a chicken or egg thing, because a lot of it's based on this question of general membership, because if you look at the executive committee membership, it's tied to specific roles of the larger membership, and oftentimes only one person in that role, and so it's like there are specific people who are brought on to the general membership, and then they are automatically a part of the executive committee, as it's currently written.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
For
right.
almost all
Which one of us
positions.
falls into that?
UVA,
Well,
You don't, because
I
you're
don't,
not a
because I'm
nonprofit. I could name Habitat,
The
we've got.
commission
on the general
representative
board,
will
we've got
always be-
people on housing.
There's
Alliance.
many, so
Yeah, there's
I think I'm the only exception, or one of the only exceptions.
I mean, I'm private sector, there's half a dozen private sector members. You're rural, you're not the only rural board
There's only
member.
one.
You're not the only elected official. So I think the mix is pretty good.
she is the only rural nonprofit representative.
But we need to fix that in a
Correct.
bigger board.
No, Kim Highland.
Well, she's
She's
your alternate.
actually not on here as a voting member,
Really?
which needs to be.
But
So I
exactly.
think, yeah, going back to what you're both saying, is we have to look at the entire
Yeah,
membership,
that's all I'm saying.
and then from that membership, what should be the makeup of an executive committee.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think at the start, the intent was to make sure we had various backgrounds, make sure we're thinking public, private sector, UVA, all the different partners.
Yeah.
But I think there can be an argument and a discussion and analysis that needs to be done to, do the roles matter in an executive committee? Or can that turnover be because the entire partnership is eligible for executive membership, not just specific roles?
Yes, that's what I was gonna bring up, was like, maybe it should be a bit more flexible, so that
I personally think that it was very thoughtfully put together.
What-
The overall initial board, we did a darn good job trying to reach out. We found 20 different groups from a very broad range. I think that's the strength of our organization. I think the executive committee is a really nice blend, and I think the results speak for themselves. And generally, I think it should be true that we individually should represent a bunch of people on the broader board. And I was surprised when you said you thought there was only one.
Well,
And I don't know that that's generally the case, and if it is, then we should look at that sector and see who else might be
it's not just.
on the broader
it's-
board.
Yeah, it's a good question to bring up.
Yeah, so, as one of the individuals who created this, set it up, I think what we need to do is grow our voting members, first of all. So we need to talk about who we want to grow the voting members. And as far, Greg, as far as this committee goes, I mean, what we really need to do is what the bylaws say, and I don't think we've been doing it. So your private sector group, whatever that group consists of, gets to a point who that sits in that seat. That is a responsibility of that group to appoint you. I'm representing the commission determines who sits in the seat, right? So forth and so on, looking through this. So I think it's a matter of us not actually complying or actually doing what our bylaws say each year, somewhere around December or whatever it is, and say, okay, groups, who do you want on your executive committee?
And I think we're heading in a really healthy direction. We're going to look at broadening the board. We should look at all the different segments we have now. We have talked about, we have added at least one segment. We added health respective to the original 20. We're now 21, I think. And then once we get the broader segment, I think it probably still makes sense using Kiesel. You know, we've got so many different legs of the stool. We want every leg at this table. And then I think, and I'm happy to initiate it with my segment to say, all right, it's time to replace the private sector person.
So I think we
And I can initiate that, or we should perhaps more formally put it out there.
So
I mean, I'm here by default because most people are very busy. I think a lot of us are here by default, meaning no one minds that they're not being asked to do a 12-meeting volunteer thing anyway. But that doesn't get the churn effect that I think.
So I'd like to break it in half. As far as the who's gonna be on there, we can tackle that a little bit later. But the how, I just think we need to delineate this in the bylaws that by such and such a day of whatever, we're using fiscal year, right? Yeah, so whatever the fiscal year is, the 10th month of the fiscal year, staff or us is responsible to reach out to our bodies and say, okay, who do you want on the executive committee for the next year?
Or pair of years,
Excuse me?
or 2 years,
Sorry?
Yeah,
or a 2-year term.
Well, I'm just working with, at the moment, it's 1 year. We can move it to 2 year, but I'm just trying to look at what was originally written and add a little bit more specificity to it. I heard you say that word, actually. Specificity.
So I agree with the specificity. I also think that this committee should have 2-year terms for the same reason.
So go ahead and talk about what we were thinking the consultants rate.
Yeah, so, and I think Keith just kind of touched on it, but I think in this discussion right now, we're looking at the framework, so the mechanism by which executive committee members are appointed or changed. But what we're thinking is we've drafted basically an RFP that would go out to the approved consultant list from Virginia Housing as part of that Tier 2 strategic plan implementation money, which I believe goes up to about $20,000, where we basically would be able to get a quote from a consultant to do this work in the scope that we were envisioning, essentially ask them to look at both the composition of the full partnership and the executive committee and sort of, not impartially, but it's difficult for us to do that work because you all represent different sectors, and it's difficult for a body to examine itself, if that makes sense. So we're thinking that it'd be really great, best case scenario, we get a solicitation from the Smart Mill, who obviously know our organization pretty well, and they would be able to really conduct a series of stakeholder, a similar structure. Yeah, and then we'd be able to come back with a report saying this is how and why the partnership composition should change. So in the context of the executive committee today, I think what Greg and Keith's conversation is the mechanism through which folks get appointed and the amount of time that they serve on the executive committee is what I think we can do now, as opposed to what exactly the composition.
Well, let's Smart Mill tell us.
Exactly, because I think we can apply what we come up with today to that decision or to that group, if that makes sense.
And they did our ton of research, just prepping for our strategic plan,
Yeah.
which I think will help inform the answer to the question, which is what I thought.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we want 2 years or 1 year? That's the question.
So I'm suggesting we have a 2-year term.
Okay.
I think it should reflect it.
Well, it certainly makes it easier to have them all.
and then for, how we were talking about 2-year terms, and you could do up to 2 consecutive terms, would we want to say unlimited number of terms, but there's that mechanism every 2 years that it has to be re-voted on?
The term limit is just the officers.
Say that again?
The term limit was just the officers, unless you're saying you want term limits for the general membership of the.
I think if there's a mechanism to re-examine it every 2 years by the broader board, we don't need to limit it.
It's incumbent upon the individual organization, one of the 20 or 30 or 40, whoever this grows to appoint. That's their role, just like you appoint the planning commissioners and so forth and so forth.
So is that in there, Keith? Where are you suggesting?
No,
that
that's, it's implied, I think, the way it's written. I just think it needs some specificity that if we're doing 24 months, that on the 20th month, each organization needs to provide us who will be on. And frankly, we don't have this in here. We actually talked about it but I think there should also be an alternate. So there's actually two people from
That's a
each.
great idea.
So mandating an alternate?
I thought we had alternates.
We allow.
Yeah.
We allow, but it's not in this document.
Okay. So that would be alternates would be, or I guess, exactly, yeah, it's in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It says voting members shall recommend for membership alternates to serve in their absence.
Got it.
I think this is going too far, but it would be great to stagger the terms. too.
That's what I was gonna say, because I think to have everybody shift
Everybody
in the
shift,
same
yeah.
time, it
Yeah.
might be hellish for the staff.
So, yeah. So like half, are you thinking like half, like 3 or then 3
Well,
and then
it's only a
4?
2-year term, it's gotta be half. It's
Yeah,
only
yeah, I guess.
Every year.
Okay.
And I really like that, the fact that the executive committee represents or reflects the full board, because I feel like there are some underrepresented voices that need to have, a seat at this table.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be easy to to marginalize some groups.
No, I think that's a good point. And there's, if we don't feel like we get there for the December vote, we can do this in March.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's nothing pressing us to get the bylaws finally voted on in December.
Because just,
So if we have to do this a few more times, to review the new writing, et cetera, then we can do that.
and I
Full
think,
membership will have to vote on.
I really think we're pretty much shooting for that beginning of fiscal year 24 to have hopefully new membership, the report being done and us having implemented it in some way, new bylaws, so like, sort of like fresh coat of paint,
So
start
worst
from
case
our-
scenario, the full partnership could vote on it in June.
Yes, that-
Effectively
yeah.
our
Mhm.
longest timeline, but it would be nice to be able to maybe do it in March.
I bet we will be able to.
Very good. Yes.
Next, Christina, question?
Yeah. Christine, can you keep answering?
I'll keep you in your favor.
I have comments. Like your request.
Do you have any gin knowledge? Does the full planning district commission needs to approve this though, we met this, right?
Unless there's a change in the TJPDC appointed positions. So right now, several of the members are appointed by the TJPDC commissioners. But I don't think the bylaws itself needs to go before the commission.
Well, let me think, if it's your committee bylaws, then the committee would, they probably would, it's pretty much a consent item, but they'd have to review it and approve the committee's.
And I think if we change this, it probably would be a good idea to have the,
I don't think it worked.
It's the committee of
because
the.
I'm trying to remember,
Right. It's an advisory committee.
did we have them, I think we had them approved originally, didn't we?
I'm sure.
We did approve at the commission, yes.
How do you get on the commission? How do you get?
The TJPDC commission, it's 2 elected or appointed officials from all 6 of the jurisdictions within the planning district 10.
So they're appointed by the jurisdictions?
Yes.
Not elected, they're appointed?
No, it's
Planning
either,
commissioner or an elected.
Okay.
And that's done in each
4 citizens.
board's annual organization.
So in my case, I'm appointed, and I believe it's a 3-year. So you could be
That's what-
appointed.
I don't know,
You were pretty quick on that.
yeah.
I tried.
I've been here all the time anyway without being appointed.
Are there any other items in the review of the bylaws that we want to get into and?
Meeting frequency, I know, is something that we've talked about. I mean, and that perhaps coincides with the electronic participation policy, or like scheduling all virtual. But I know that folks, I don't know, I feel like we've talked a lot about folks feel like meeting monthly for the executive committee. In the last few months, we've obviously had a lot of things going on. But before that, folks kind of felt like that was too much. I don't know if it's worth, it's worth a conversation, I think.
I think from a bylaws perspective, it gives you the flexibility to do it, and then the work dictates the schedule.
Okay.
So I think now that we've got the committees of the strategic plan
Yeah.
set up, this work's being done. The other committees are working on the events committee and things like that. It's likely that the workload of this committee does not need to be monthly, but for next calendar year, I don't expect it to be monthly.
Right.
Just like the NPO needs what, 9 times a year. So other committees of the TJPDC are not meeting that frequently, but will if needed for any particular action. But I don't think you don't dictate that in the bylaw.
Right, okay, cool.
So how do the committees of this organization get appointed and re-upped and stuff like that?
So we create the committee, and then we, with given the charge, can determine the participation. So like the data committee and the communications committee, we kind of dictated that. We've all been told people that.
I remember.
Tell us how you
The
really
Article
feel.
6, Article 6.
I do remember it. I mean, I was here.
You vote.
And frankly, that's not, I guess I can say it since I'm the one that, as the chair, said, let's do it that way.
Right.
As the chair's role, and you can form a committee, you can kind of dictate how it's being done. But in the nature of getting the strategic plan done, it was just, yeah, let's just.
No, I totally, I agreed with that, so I'm not.
Now, you could put the committee together, and then as the executive committee says, well, here, we're gonna put this committee in place, and we want to do it for this reason, then you would discuss how you would.
Well, that's right, I guess what I was asking, because the events committee exists, it's a standing
That's
committee.
right.
And.
Article 6, committees, the executive and the events committee are standing committees.
Right,
Then the executive committee can create committees as they deem advisable and appoint members to those committees.
and so if there's no like, rules about, like if you get on the events committee, you'll never get off of it again. Or it will no new person who wants to be on the, you know, what's that process look like? Because I don't know who's on the events committee and how
We
often.
didn't drill down to do the membership of that. I suspect that, yeah, every committee then has its own set of bylaws and operating guidelines, et cetera, but we've just never gone to that, get down into the weeds.
Well, the committees, I mean, other than the events, they're really working groups.
Yeah.
Right, they're
Right.
work groups, and I don't know if those require terms or term limits, because it's dependent upon the work that they're completing. You know, I think if you're looking for, not you
I
personally,
understand.
but if you're looking for a way to get off of a committee once you've been appointed to it, I think that's something different, and that probably does need to be spelled out.
In the number 3, in Article 6 for committees, it says committee meetings, miscellaneous, the provisions of these bylaws which cover meetings, notice, and quorum, and voting requirements by the executive committee shall apply to committees of the executive committee. So does that answer what you're saying? Are we saying that committee members are essentially elected every 2 years, instead of two-year terms?
Agree with that, yeah.
So there's a way we need to go.
I don't,
Usually your committees.
I'm not on it. I just was curious because, I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of like to the point of like, you know, new blood and stuff like that. I mean, it probably would be healthy to look at the standing committees. I mean, if we're looking at the executive committee, why wouldn't we look at the other standing committee at the same time?
And we can add that to the scope of the consultant work as well. Look at that.
So in theory, on a 2-year basis, we would be voting on membership of all committees. Just to reaffirm or to change over.
And those could be staggered as well, probably should be in some, you know, in some way.
Yeah, it's,
Or, I don't know, membership.
Well, this is an ad hoc committee, which is a very specific thing that has get accomplished and then it goes away.
Right.
Yeah.
But only apply to this.
Yeah. And that's-
any other?
Yes, just a quick, this is probably just confirming that the question about like dues, that's gonna also be a question for the consultants, I'm assuming.
that is not
Didn't know if that was.
Yeah, that's,
Well, I mean, we could, we just didn't discuss that.
yeah, what do you, like, in terms of,
membership.
Well, like this past year, there was a request
right,
that was put towards, you know, maybe all the members of the RHP. And we had that discussion about is membership dues-based, is it not dues-based, but we are, you know, we are entitled to ask for support. I just didn't know if that was something we wanted to explicitly address in the bylaws through the consultants. That was my question. I don't know, I guess it's a question.
That's a very fair thing, because we've been dancing around that for a long time. You know, does this get put into the bylaws that in order to be on this body, there's a fee attached to it? Or do we do like we've been doing it, is, you know, what else? My hearing aids ain't working, what'd you say?
Coercion.
I was gonna say begging, but.
You know, I'll say I'm not necessarily suggesting we need to address that now, per se, but if there is the ability to get some feedback from consultants, I think we should go ahead and do it.
Are you talking about dues?
Yeah, I would say we could include language in the scope of another deliverable on like benchmarking membership-based
Yeah, I was
organizations
just
and
gonna
how
say,
they have
if
fee
it-
structures associated with membership
Yeah,
fees.
I can add that.
And even make a
Oh, yeah, that's in there,
recommendation.
that's in there.
The fee structure?
Yeah. It's in there. I thought
And
it was.
Surprise.
And that's gonna be the heavy lift in all of this.
Can I throw out a question as a newbie? That I feel like maybe a little bit connected to that last one, that I still have a lot to learn about. What has it been like engaging affordable housing residents? Both, it says on the executive committee, but also that there would be representatives on the full partnership. What has that been like?
Yeah, I think that's what we're getting after with this consultant stuff. Do we have-
That's one of those.
Yes, are the right places.
I think we
So
recognize that.
FAR is the answer to the executive committee. They are the residents representative of this group.
Yeah.
I think there are other organizations that should be on the broader board. And that's an important part of the exercise we've been talking about.
And we work in
I guess
communications.
in that conversation, I wonder what role resident representatives would have in these meetings, what kinds of decisions they would be hearing about and contributing to. When I say that, in order to think about who in public housing residents and who in Section 8 residents that we have contact with, and then there are other low-income housing groups that I have connections with, but it's hard to, I guess, point to this meeting in particular, it's hard to see what they would be working on in this group and participating. So and that might need to be articulated with the consultants also. I know that for us, that there's resident engagement and getting resident voice is a whole separate project. And it involves framing of the questions and framing of the opportunities for input. It's different from how this group is probably operating. Just a guess, just from the last, maybe other sense. So, I would be happy if there is a chance to talk with the consultants to connect them also with the Fall Resident Advisory Board and other groups. But I also am not sure what the decisions are that they would have a chance to think about. So that's something that
Yeah.
Ian can fill me in on later. It also might be that we want to just have intermittent resident facing events where residents are invited in a broad way to understand what's going on and to speak on it. I know there's a lot of concern about loss of affordable housing, so I think that there could be a lot of really healthy participation.
Yeah, I think Lauren, Jean, and I were talking about this earlier, and I think there's potentially a tension between an advisory committee or an organization being represented, sort of this organization engaging primarily with stakeholders rather than citizens. But like what you're describing, Taylor, I think is a great idea where how can this board incorporate, I know there's language in the bylaws about advisory boards to this board, right? So if there's some mechanism through which we can engage more directly with residents, that could be, but isn't necessarily representation on the full partnership, if that makes sense. And rather organizations like FAR and organizations that represent these groups. Exactly, CMRS, like organizations that work directly either in direct service or with specific populations, that's one of the questions that we want the consultants to answer. So thank you for bringing that up, both of you guys.
And that same thought process also applies with the private sector, right? And all the other sectors, us here are supposed to be representing these sectors for this conversation. And to Ian's point, that's one of the reasons why we left the other committees a little, let's say, loosely organized. Like, for instance, Stacy Petia is running the events committee, and she's not a member, right? So there could be the civilian, the resident, thank you, sorry. My Marine Corps brain went sideways there for a minute. Residents or other folks within these 4 pillars can participate. Sorry about the Marine Corps brain going sideways.
It's all good, very good. Are there any other suggestions, areas for the bylaws? Won't be the final call, we'll still have chances, I guess, if we want to.
But we've got very specifics on the bylaws, which is separate from the composition of the board. So it seems to me,
That's what I'm asking.
I'm not so sure,
Specifics.
aren't we there on the bylaws?
Well, we'll bring back.
Can't we bring it back next month
Yeah.
to the executive? With these ideas tweaked, and we might be able to do the bylaws ready in advance of the exercise of broadening the board.
I'm with you, I'm asking, is there anything else to add to the list? If there's other topics in there.
No, the only one that's in the back of my mind, I think, will come out of that work.
Yeah.
And that's more of PDC housing programs and the regional housing partnership, making sure we're engaging with our federal housing programs and eviction prevention work and all of the other housing stuff. Maybe that comes into like membership. Is there somebody that needs to be here that represents those programs that are, regional in nature?
But Spark Mill's gonna help us with that.
Right,
Yeah,
I think it'll come out of that.
And has Spark Mill given you any indication about their workload, is if
No,
get
so
awarded?
so we had to wait to get this body's approval essentially, or,
We have not sent the RFP out.
No, we're sending that tomorrow.
That's number 6.
Maybe.
Sorry. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
I also feel compelled to state for the record that we do have to do this through procurement.
Yeah.
And so we'll review whatever proposals we receive with this story.
Only other one I would throw out there real quick is just staffing. I find that to be really interesting, and I think it's working great. And we can always change the bylaws in the future should that eventually, shift. But does that work to kind of keep it like it is? Just basically saying that TJPC shall provide administrative staffing up to an amount included in the annual budget. Like, I don't know, in some future place, if we do fundraise and we have the money to, I don't know.
Yeah.
We can also deal with that later, of course, but I just want to throw it out there in case there was.
The staffing is somewhat dictated by the commission and the way they staff out the committees. But it doesn't limit us if we wanted to go beyond it if the funding was there.
Yeah. Cool.
So just a clarification, the dues issue will end up being the bylaw, potentially.
Well, I think the conversation was, is it going to be a bylaw specificity, or we're going to keep it the way we've been doing it?
And what I think I heard is that the consultant will look at best practices.
Yeah.
And then bring that subject back probably to this group.
I prefer that myself, just because then as soon as it's in the bylaws, you're locking it in, you don't have any flexibility with, let's waive the dues for such and such. Oh, we don't have a bylaw that allows us to do this, and the consultant should look at that.
And plus, the discussion will be a lot easier if a third party says, this is that's what it should be.
Awesome. So anything else for bylaws review? This is great. We can attempt to pass these if we're all comfortable with it at the December partnership, or we can get it all drafted.
Yeah, I think.
Get it back to us by then, and then target March for the full bylaws.
I would think so, in case we want to incorporate recommendations from the consultants into the bylaws.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Very good. Perhaps though we could does this executive committee want to do one last pass with the changes before the full partnership sees the draft? Or do we want to just go ahead and release the draft to them in December, or wait? Any thoughts on that? Probably should just keep it to us until we sort of push it out.
Yeah.
Get another one to consult.
I don't think there's that big a rush that it has to be done for the full board in December, as long as it's in place by June.
Yeah, for the fiscal year.
Great.
And I'd hesitate to put a draft in front of the partnership that may change.
A couple times.
Yeah, so wait to have a final draft before having a full partnership review.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll move to new business, number 5, Regional Housing Partnership Governing Board presentation. So we are going, Mr. Smith and I will be kicking off, we talked about this briefly at the last meeting, going to the elected boards of our region, of our PDC membership, to do a presentation on the Regional Housing Partnership, who we are, what we do, etc. That kicks off on the 13th of December with Greene County. And Ian's been working to get us on all the agendas of the boards. Now, like in Greene County, I think we've been given 10 minutes, so it's not like this is a full-on work session. This is a get there. We're meeting later today to start discussing what that 10 minutes looks like, and there's some other stuff coming out of it that we'll invite them to. So the thought is we get there, we give a very quick, brief overview presentation. I'm talking 2 minutes or so, having given them some information ahead of time. And if we're successful, we've talked about they ask questions that push us past their 10-minute time. So, but we'll have a deliverable for them of obviously our annual summit. And then we're toying with the idea, Keith had a good idea of, along with the 50th, sorry, did I mention that?
Yeah, Chairman.
50th anniversary, to invite them to something as a follow-up conversation from the 10 minutes that would be more involved about what the TJPDC does, not just the Regional Housing Partnership. So we're hoping the success probably looks like boards at least know who the partnership is, what we're doing to serve them, how we're an asset and a tool for them, and then invite them to get to know what the PDC does for them, even beyond the Regional Housing Partnership down the road. So what I would imagine once we've got the final presentation together, we can send that out for folks to see if they'd like, and then as we do these, we'll just report to the executive committee how they went. But the only one we'll get done by the end of the year is Green. Yeah. The rest will be at the start of the year.
And each one will be tailored to each jurisdiction, right? So Charlotte will be a little bit different than Green will be different than Albemarle County on that end of it. And I just thought, having a 50-year event here and getting everybody in a room, offering them a little food and have them in our house, we'll be able to spend a little more time with them. I can tell you some of the rural jurisdictions question certain elected officials in the rural jurisdictions question the existence of this body. So this is the matter of being not properly educated.
And the lightning strike moment was I think we already mentioned this, a great conversation a couple of commission meetings ago at the commission level around affordable housing after Ian did a presentation that everybody participated in. So it's kind of coming on the heels of some momentum, if you will, at the commission level, to then get out to those bodies, because the commission members can then be kind of the host, if you will, to the other members of their elected bodies. We're kind of taking advantage of that conversation a little bit of time.
Thanks for doing it. This is good.
I was hoping for a little bit more than 10 minutes, but
Yeah,
I can't even say hello.
We could, I guess, if we, every board meeting will be different. I'm thinking about.
Just ask for forgiveness instead of permission. So once you get up there and sit down, you're done.
I've done that before. And usually the sheriff comes and grabs me.
Yeah, there's others.
Or letting that do it.
At least you're hitting the haters.
Well, that might be just on general purposes.
Very good. Number 6 is the RFP that we've been discussing. So Ian, you can take that.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of laid it out, but yeah, basically the other half of this that isn't the framework of the partnership, maybe a little bit in the scope, but we're really looking at the composition of both the executive committee, full partnership, and potentially the fee structure. So that would go out. VHDA has a list, or Virginia Housing rather, has a list of approved consultants that you have to use, one of them being Spark Mill. So per y'all's approval, we would just send that out to the list tomorrow in solicitation to, ones that look appropriate.
You need a motion?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. What's the timeline?
So that's a great question. The application is due by the end of the year, and so we will have, but you have to have a consultant's quote as a part of the application. And so we will be able to give that, we'll be able to have that, I believe, on the 27th or 8th, very close to the end of the year, because usually the application is due on May 31st, but it was due December 31st this year. But anyway, we'll get it in. I need to review how long it takes, but from what I remember, from once the application was resubmitted for the initial strategic plan, it really wasn't that much time between
We
application.
almost do it as a whole.
So how
Yeah.
long did you have for the RHP report?
Oh, like, what, let's see,
It's
2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, yeah. Like it's 2 weeks and then 7 days for review. It's something that aligns with our procurement.
It's the minimum requirement.
Yeah, it's the minimum requirement, but it aligns.
good luck.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
So we're applying for the grant, and the grant will then fund the work.
Exactly.
The RFP covers.
Yeah, and the RFP makes it clear that the funding is per receiving the actual grant from Virginia Housing.
So by code, it's gotta be out there for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you have to have so many days to review it.
Do you have to have so many responses?
No, we have to send it to 3 or 4. We're gonna send it to a whole list.
That's right.
So it won't, yeah, we don't have to have that many, there's no response requirement, right? It's
Yeah, just solicit up to.
But these people know
They want the
how it
money,
runs,
yeah.
because they're the ones that are on the
Yep.
list
They've been
and
doing
get
this.
these requests all the time.
Exactly. So, great, thank you guys.
Awesome. Well, we left off on the agenda, we usually do a round table.
Yeah.
And that's not on here, but I would welcome that you guys we can do a round table if you would like. Because we're running ahead, but I will be exiting just.
I was gonna say, you made the excuse.
I get to go listen to Robinson, Farmer, and Jim Cox do yet another audit committee. I don't know how I ended up with so many audit committees this year, but that's not good for your life.
Is it Dave doing it again?
But I'll leave that to you guys' discretion if you'd like to share. I will say Albemarle is looking, I'm hoping, that we bring our incentive conversation for housing Albemarle to close in February. So that policy can stand before the 2-year anniversary of passing it. We'll see. That's how I feel about that. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to hand the meeting over to Keith.
You're doing it remotely, you're gonna come back for this other thing? Or?
Yeah, I'll be at the county office for Ian will talk to you.
We'll do it on Zoom if.
All these in
Yeah, because I've got it at 4 o'clock.
Okay. We can talk and then I can talk about that.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, I accidentally.
So
I'm not, that was a very efficient meeting,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I know. The other chairman was horrible. How's everybody feel about adjourning and getting on with their day?
Yeah.
Every day.
We adjourn.
Done.
Yeah, I'll say something.
Look at that. Those are easy.
Yeah, actually,
That was the shortest